So welcome everybody. My name's Matt Hodges-Long. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Building Safety Register. And tonight, this is our first book club, if you like, to discuss the Fire Safety Consultation, the government response to it. And that's about as far as I've got. Confession time, I've never been to a book club. So I did have to Google it and see what the rules were. And apparently the rules are that everybody should have read the book before the meeting. So I've actually broken the first rule. I'll put my hand up first and say that I haven't actually managed to read all of the consultation. I think I was about 3 hours into it, and Deepa's apologising as well. About 3 hours into it and ran out of time, basically. So I think the first observation I would have is, and I did mention some of the guys at the start when we were chatting before, is if a consultation document that's talking about changes to legislation takes 2 or 3 hours to read, the question I would have firstly is, how on earth do we implement that in any meaningful kind of time frame? And the further conversation we went on to was the fact that this is just one of many regulatory and legislation changes that are coming up. And if you multiply that even by high-rise buildings, residential buildings, we're looking at about 12 to 13,000. So whatever we're talking about now, we've got to do 13,000 times. Discuss. That's one of the things I'd like to talk about is the doability of all of this. So that's the plan. So I think what I want to do, I'll raise a couple of points and then maybe we'll probably just jump around, see where it goes. If anybody wants to say something, just stick your hand up in your virtual hand up or your real hand up, and I'll bring you in. But when you come in for the first time, if you could just explain who you are and what your viewpoint is on all of this stuff, that would be wonderful. I will also be looking around because I've got notes and I've got the meeting room to manage to bring people in when they come in late, and the chat and all that sort of stuff. So without further ado then, I wrote down a couple of thoughts at the end. I sort of skipped to the end and came up with some thoughts. So the first one was around how long it took to read it. Second thought I had was how many calls there are in there for sharing information with residents and between responsible persons and the fire and rescue service, which I think are all great things. An absolute absence of detail about how to do that. So lots of ideas and people being very supportive of stuff, but no real kind of detail about how to implement. And then that brings me on to my last point, which came up in the House of Commons debate on the fire safety bill last night, but is also buried in the text of the consultation response, which is the government's commitment to implementing the phase 1 Grenfell Tower inquiry recommendations. And in the consultation paper, they say before the 2nd anniversary of the recommendations. That came up in the Commons last night again as October this year. So the first question I would have with all of this change and without the fire safety bill passing yet, without going back to the Lords, is, is October a realistic timeframe? Bearing in mind the complexity of all of the different elements of the phase 1 recommendations, of which only a small number have actually been implemented, but in terms of the responsible person stuff, I don't think any of them have been implemented at scale. But that was just some of my thoughts. I've got loads of detail on the different bits of what's said, but has anyone got any thoughts on the consultation overall, firstly?
I think I'll jump in, Matt. I think how can we have a fire bill amendment before the consultation is done? And as a fire safety practitioner, straight after Grenfell, I was on an assignment for a very large English housing association, and it's taken them years to start thinking about amending fire safety order that we all know it's got duplication with the Housing Act. It doesn't pick up Regulation 16B for fire safety information properly. It doesn't have a legacy ownership of fire safety information. It's got problems with who's competent, who's responsible, and its application to residential tower blocks is very, very poor, and the water's been muddied. So why is it taking them so long? Why are we trying to put through a bill amendment before we get the consultation back? And now that we've got the consultation back and the bill's hung up, is it time to really start from scratch and rewrite our primary legislation and pick up all the issues we've uncovered over the past 4 years? But it leaves a risk with the Grenfell inquiry, phase 2. So everything's out of kilter.
So just on that point, I did mean to mention the timing. So just so everyone's aware, this consultation went out for consultation on the 20th of July last year. It closed on the 12th of October 2020, but it took 5 months, pretty much 5 months exactly, or just over 5 months for the government to publish it. So this could have been published well in advance of the fire safety bill readings, but I don't know whether anyone really kind of knows what happened over that 5 month period, or quite why it was so sort of slow to progress. But yeah, we were chasing for it from December, and we kept getting responses back from Home Office saying, "Oh, it's imminent, it's soon, it's just around the corner, etc." And then finally got them to say March, but they wouldn't say when in March. So it seems as though it was calculated to appear at the time of the bill going through, and quite a lot of the references in there are around amending the fire safety order through the building safety bill. So that seems to be the mechanism for, I don't know enough about the law, but a lot of this stuff seems to be dependent upon the building safety bill going through, which, again, from the Commons yesterday, the latest hint from one of the MPs was that he thought that was sort of 18 months to 2 years away. So what happens? How do the Grenfell Tower inquiry, recommendations get implemented? Via what legal mechanism? It's a really interesting one. So yeah, anyone
right
any thoughts on
that? And also you'll have a transitional period, won't you, while you make those amendments and changes. But I found it a good read, actually. There's lots of positives in there. And I think the response probably took some time because the question sets had a lot of free text and they've got to interpret that. So maybe I'm just being generous there, but perhaps that's why. But it certainly gives time, I think, when the bill comes through, in order to put the mechanism in place to introduce, because don't forget, it talks a lot about new responsibilities and positions. And so all of those people need to be found and trained.
Yeah, I didn't, in my read of it, and it may be where I've missed it, I didn't actually see any narrative about implementation periods or staging. No, I think that's been talked about in the fire safety bill, but in terms of this consultation, they didn't really sort of cover the, are we talking about months or years?
No, you're right. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the bits I pulled out, just to, if you dive into the detail, one of the things that talks around the floor plans of buildings and sharing those with the fire and rescue service, and it talks about paper, it talks about digital, etc. And then there's an item in there about a national standard for floor plans. Mm-hmm. So you think of the reality of working through defining what that national standard is, and then going and getting somebody to draw all of them at what cost over what time frame for probably 500,000 blocks. And again, we haven't. The only data we've got at the moment is around, in terms of the height categories. MHCLG talk about 12,000 or so, 18 metre above, so high rise. 11 to 18 metres, they talk about 76,000 blocks. I think this is just in England. And then nobody knows the number. MHCLG don't give a number for sub 11 metres. So we sort of guessed that at sort of 200,000 to be conservative. So even if it was, you're looking at 288,000 blocks that potentially would all need new floor plans to be drawn with riser locations, etc., to then be shared with the fire and rescue service. And that's just one item.
Can I come in on that? Actual experience. Back in 2005, I was senior manager of a local authority. And before that, but when the fire safety order came in, we had an enormous portfolio, £200 million worth of property, local authority portfolio, to schools and civic centres, libraries and everything to sort out. And we still had a program of my surveyors, about 40 team in the surveyors and whatever, were managing property. So they really didn't have the time to look at all the floor plans and the building drawings that we've got. So we, in the wisdom of the council, we got a consultant to do it, and they put a lot of people in there with distos and things like that, and drew a lot of AutoCAD drawings that we got. And over the years from that, they were so inaccurate. It was not true. You know, we had to start overlaying them, and my God, before we could do plans and drawing, they were an absolute nightmare. And then training people up to be the responsible person under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. Take, for instance, the schools. I had 70 schools that I was looking after. I actually called 70 headmasters together, and we had a headmasters conference, and I told them about what they're going to have to do on this. And they wanted to string me up. They said, David, we've got schools to run. We're not fire people. I said, but you are now running your school. You've got to manage the school, the fire, the asbestos and whatever. Anyway, they said, well, what is the next step? And I said, well, you've got to have somebody that's responsible, and I will train them up. So over the period, we set training up, and they actually gave me assistant groundsmen, dinner ladies, part-time librarians and things like that. And I trained those people up through a course. And when they went away, they must have spoken to their husbands and wives and various things like that, and realized the onerous responsibility that they were taking on. Most of them just peeled away. So reality is, I reckon, from my experience, that aren't really responsible people looking after the buildings, and I don't think they've been looking after the buildings since the 2005 when it first came in. So that's the reality. What we're seeing in Grenfell bears testament to that in a way, because everyone talks about these, as I say, the British standards, the regulations, this and that, but when it comes down to it, when you've got investigative QCs like Millett and Kate Grange and things like that, pulling it apart, minuscule part. These people that are supposed to know really don't, to the level that. So what you were saying, Stephen, about is it time to rewrite the whole thing? It's a reset time. It's a reset moment. That's my view. I would love actually one document that sort of almost compressed it all together, even a signpost document, going back to 2011, something like that. Well, in fact, before that, 1998, I was doing work as a consultant for various local authorities. Croydon said to me, they didn't use technical terms. The guy, the maintenance manager there, he rang me up one day and he said, look, we've got 8 blocks of, they're pretty horrible blocks. They were the 60s concrete blocks, New Addington, Monks Hill, and all the various estates and all that around there. His exact brief was, David, can you pretty them up? Nothing about energy, nothing about fire, whatever. I did. Strangely enough, I didn't reach for British standards because at that stage, I have to say, I couldn't afford them. I used basic principles. If you're putting something on a building, you shouldn't make it more vulnerable to fire. You should actually risk assess, find something that's not going to burn, that's going to give you a measure of the insulation. What I came up with was a steel rain screen cladding, and rock wool insulation. After the fire, there were only a dozen buildings that actually in the whole of the UK that passed when they went absolutely mad looking at all these high rise. 8 of them were mine in the Croydon borough. So I've got a hollow pride for that, but I actually hate. I really, at the moment, I have a loathing for the sector within which I work, because
is there an element then of I think of common sense, which is that some of this is coming through in the consultation around, but it's being dressed up with sort of really prescriptive rules. And what I found interesting as I was reading through it is that people were calling in the free text comments for prescriptive rule. We want clear rules. We want, tell us what to do, which is entirely at odds with the Hackett recommendation for sort of risk-based regulation. Well, you write a safety case, you work out what you want to do, and then we'll really scrutinise it with Mr. Millett if there's something goes wrong after the event, and then we'll tell you whether your safety case, But I just wanted to bring in, if Deepa's happy to talk, because Deepa put a question in the chat, and I probably misunderstood your question, Deepa. So, and I don't know whether she's on mute at the moment, so I don't know whether she's going to talk. I might have called her.
That must be for Office Block.
I'm here. Hello.
Deepa, can you just introduce yourself a minute? Because I think you've got really.
Hi, I'm Deepa Mistry. I'm a leaseholder, and I'm stuck in a housing association flat.
Brilliant. What was your question again, Deepa? Because I've forgotten it.
It was when you were talking about the standards, that there's no standardized plan for buildings, but my assumption was, this may be quite naive, is that that's just that there is a standardized way of putting plans forward for a building. I'm assuming that is the case for office blocks, and so if that is the case, can that not just be replicated for flats, blocks of flats?
This refers to a simplified floor plan or floor plans for the buildings for the Fire and Rescue Service to be able to identify where key information is. And most of the design drawings would be really, I mean, some other people can probably jump in instead of me, but would be very full of layers of different levels of complexity. So they're really noisy and difficult to interpret unless you know what you're looking at. So this is a sort of almost like a cartoon version, if you like, of a very simple. Is there anyone that's more technical than me that can jump in on that one?
Sorry.
Tony, let's go to Tony. Tony's got hand up. You're on mute, Tony. That's it.
Okay. I'm in here because I had 35 years in Saudi Arabia and various working on high-rise buildings, mostly built to US codes or the Gulf codes, which superseded them, but were based on the same thing. And I just commented on Twitter today. There's a BBC webpage now that's talking about the cladding on Grenfell and 9 things that were wrong with it. And they mention towering infernos in the Gulf in 2013. Now, I was there then, and nobody died. They didn't die because those buildings had 2 protected exits required by the codes. And that dates back to the Chicago fire back in the 1800s. And has been in US codes since at least the turn of the century. Grenfell had 1 open internal staircase.
Had 1 in, 1 out.
Yeah. Anyway, the point was, combined with the not being able to get out, that's why the people died. It wasn't because, although there was the fire of the cladding, the Gulf fires showed that wasn't important. The fire could happily happen, but the people got out because they had the exits. Now on Grenfell, they didn't have the protected exits. They didn't get the fire crews can't get up above maybe 7 floors with the water. And I doubt there's any internal water supply, no sprinklers, no decent fire alarm system. There's a recipe for disaster. Now, going to the floor plans, most of the projects that I've worked on had, as you say, plans with lots of AutoCAD plans with lots of layers. And one of those lots of layers is fire protection, fire exits, fire zoning. All of that should be there. If they're not on UK buildings, then sorry, you're behind the times. Anyway, if there are existing digital plans, it's pretty easy these days to convert them all to a PDF format that almost anybody can read for the fire service. And if not, if they've only got paper drawings, they can scan them again to PDFs and anybody can read them.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that insight, Tony. I didn't know that. So we know we've got somebody in the group now that's got experience in the Gulf. I think it's a great point about this tension between sort of life protection and property protection that we often see now, where you might tick the life protection blocks, but you don't necessarily tick the property protection box, and that leads to a problem with insurance, for example. But that's sort of slightly off topic for what we're on tonight. Was there anything else anybody's got from their scan of the consultation guidance that sort of jumped out at them in terms of what they thought was good or bad or didn't understand? Or Tony Boulder. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm just reading about the fire doors business. You know, there's still this really unclear area about the checking of fire doors and whether it's just going to be the self-closers or everything else. And I'm just trying to work out if this kind of fits in parity with what the CAN said just over a year ago, and the Annex saying how detailed that was, and whether or not actually that's going to be affected when the FSB comes in. So this doesn't really give us a great deal of information on that one, I don't think. It certainly looks like it's moved away from what it was discussing before about 3 months for 18 meters or more in the communal areas, which then would comply with Grenfell phase 1, etc., etc. So they seem to have moved away from that, but still it's not a great deal, I don't think, if anybody else has got their own views on it, of what it really gives us some definitives about where we move with fire doors moving forward. Yes, it's going to be in Article 6, but the CAN kind of gives everybody that information, but there it's only talking about higher rise buildings now rather than what the CAN said about multi-ocs across the board. So it's a little bit, I don't know, not in parity with it, I think, at the moment, but let's see what happens.
And does anyone want to jump in on that? Or I mean, I read it, I must admit, I was just taking notes, and the third proposal that relates to the fire doors talks about checking the type of fire door if there is combustible cladding on the building. I thought, well, that's a bit weird, because before that it was just self-closers, and then there's heights, and it just seemed really unclear to me on first scan of exactly what the test regime is proposed to be. You know, that seemed...
They put a lot of time and effort into Annex A and providing all of the flow charts and everything. And it's kind of like you just said there, it's almost saying you only need to do this if you've got a high-rise building with unsafe cladding on it now. And it's kind of stepping back away, because obviously a lot of the social landlords in the country saw this and saw the CAN as like their fourth bridge, constantly doing fire doors all the time. The amount of resources that they would have had to have thrown into that, because as you all know, a lot of people work with large house associations, they've got literally thousands of doors that they would have fallen under that particular aspect of it. So maybe the government is stepping away a little bit, but it's still a very woolly area. And I think it might end up with housing associations or social landlords across the board just deciding against some kind of a spine that the government put out, they're going to decide what they're going to do. But of course, let's not forget, they even put out in the CAN, didn't they, to follow LGA guide as the benchmark guidance. And it kind of, ever since that's happened, it's kind of like stepped away from that a little bit. So I'm just a little bit, I don't know, it's just a bit of a woolly area still, amongst many woolly areas in this particular document, I think.
Absolutely. Andrew Turby, I'm going to bring you in. I noticed you had your hand up, so just on mute at the moment. That's
yes, yeah, no, thanks very much, Matt. I just had a question, just following on from that comment, Tony. Just to introduce myself, I'm a little bit of an outsider here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in. My interest is, I work for a mortgage lender, so I'm interested from that perspective, and I'm also interested from a personal perspective, because I grew up in a council block, in a block of flats. It wasn't a high-rise block of flats, actually, the one I grew up in, but the other ones on the estate were. So I'm very sort of personally interested in this as well. But my question was, just in response to this sort of painting the Forth Road Bridge, there seems to be quite a lot in here that just seems to be adding to, you know, there are new jobs that need to be done. You need to do this every month, and you need to do that, and you need to do this, and the requirements for the responsible people and all that kind of stuff. Is this going to mean? I mean, to your point earlier, David. I mean, if you're a head teacher, you're not going to be doing this. You're going to be delegating it to someone else. You're going to be getting a consultant in or something like that. What is this going to mean in terms of costs and just sort of ongoing requirements for building professionals? Is it going to be really expensive?
Steve, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I've worked for I don't mean to, I'm an independent fire consultant. I pick my projects. I come in as a troubleshooter, and I've done 3 housing assignments since Grenfell. One for a housing association, 40,000 buildings. One for a local authority, the 200 to 300 high rise, plus 50 odd shelter housing, plus 50 hostels. That was my main priority groups. Anything below 18 metres was shelved. We just do the routine risk assessments. When we did cost models at a Hackett review, it would cost me between £3 and £7 million just to do building safety cases, another £1.5 million just to do PIBs, and another about 750k just to do PEEPs. When we started racking up all those costs and we modelled portfolio, it was more effective for us to fund fire suppression, fire doors in all our single stair core high rise.
Steve, can I just jump in a minute, Steve? Can I just do a couple of translations for anybody that isn't involved in this? So PIBs are premises information boxes, which we'll probably talk about later, but they're metal boxes that you bolt to the wall and put bits of paper in that somebody, if they've got the key, can unlock it and maybe read it if it's up to date, but you're probably a bit prejudiced in the way I'm explaining that. And then PEEPs are personal emergency evacuation plans. So they are plans for an individual that may have mobility or other vulnerability issues that sort of describe their needs for evacuation. So anyway, sorry, Steve, back to you.
So what we did was we took the building safety bill, and the one thing I always read is have the bill, have the consultation, and have the economic impact assessment. Look at the numbers, look at the values, look at the cost, and do a reality check on that. When we did it, it was costing us tens of millions of pounds. So what we did was, we'd already taken off the cladding, we'd already triaged the buildings. So we did anything over 30 metres, anything between 30 and 18 metres with a single stair core, all our hostels and all our sheltered housing. And my risk profile did that. We pushed back on the fire door inspections and said, we'll have a roving programme, just as we did in hospitals. We do the critical areas, we do the high hazard areas, and then once a year a door might get checked, or once every 5 years, because the cost model is crazy just now. So what I say is, the legislation says one thing, then with secondary legislation, it gives us an indication of thou shalt check, fast check, and the frequency to check. We always have a risk-based legislation that we can do an acid test on it. So practical measures to keep people safe without bankrupting the organisation, without bankrupting leaseholders, and improving safety. Sorry?
Steve, I think, I don't know whether it's just me, but you were really lagging then. So should we jump somewhere else? Let's bring someone else in then. So Crevan, have I pronounced your name correctly?
Yeah, Crevan.
Crevan, come on in, Crevan.
So I'm, again, kind of a bit of an outsider. First of all, I'm from Ireland.
That's fine.
And second of all, I'm a student. But I'm doing, I suppose, work for a startup in Ireland called PlanQuest. And we effectively make a Google Maps digital solution for buildings. I suppose what interests me is, I was just looking at, is it proposal 13. It's saying, in addition, the responsible persons provide an additional single page building plan. Wasn't really like, how can you have a single page building plan for 20, 30, 40 stories?
That's a really good question, because I read that and had the same thought in my head as to,
I wasn't really sure.
is it just 40 tiny little drawings on one page, or how big is the page? What do they? I read, yeah, I interpreted that there was sort of a, if I'm going to give a firefighter one piece of paper to hold in their hand and look at, it's sort of that. But yeah, quite what's on it is a very good question. I don't know. I don't know whether anyone's got an idea of, if they had one side of A4 for a 30-story building, what would they put on it?
Yeah, the answer is don't give it to them on paper.
Or it'll be a digital file, but are they giving them BIM data, or that's kind of, I think it's very unclear. Like when they say digital can come in a wide variety of forms, but even within that, is it, like we're saying, cartoon drawings? Is it drawings labeled with of critical firefighting assets, of whatever it may be? I think it was very, very broad, I guess, in terms of what the digital drawing, but somebody may be more informed.
If you have digital drawings of the building, you can make an iPad application or whatever else, that where you can put a list menu on it, and you're looking at whichever particular floor. You click on that floor, and it'll immediately bring up the plan. And from the basic architect's digital plans, you can make simplified plans that are dedicated for firefighters.
Yeah, so I suppose that's kind of what we're looking at the moment. But are they expecting every, I suppose, responsible person or safety manager or owner to do that for their building?
I would hope so.
Yeah, that's the way it reads. And at the start, we were talking about the fact that that's at least 300,000 buildings that would need to go through that process. So to Jason's point earlier, is what we're not really clear on yet, is how long would the lead-in be? Would they start with taller buildings first? All of those sorts of questions around, but set against the government saying or hinting over the last few days that they're looking to roll this out from October this year. So we're going to hit that date very quickly. I know David looks like he's poised.
I've got to come in. Guys, I don't want to push any particular product, but a few years ago, I'm a member of Kent Inventors Forum, and we're hosted by Greenwich University, because back in the 1989, when I needed to do those overcladdings for the buildings that passed the BRE, I looked at the automatic opening vents on a single staircase there, and they didn't work. You know, they were stuck. In fact, just anecdotally, I found one when, not one, but several at the lower level, the automatic opening vents, somebody in their wisdom had put locking cockspur handles on them to stop vandals opening them. How about that? And the key was back in the Civic Centre, several miles away, which absolutely is a hoot. But during, after the Grenfell, I got contacted by a 14-year-old inventor that became Young Inventor of the Year. And he is now 17, 18. He's now MD of his company, and they're doing Point Cloud. And you can look him up on Google. It's called Arway, ARWAY. It's Point Cloud. And you know, he was so, Baron was so traumatized by the fire, as I was. And he came to me because I was involved with this, and I'd been, and you know, we become friends, we talked and whatever, and his product has developed to the point now where he's an MD of his company. He's just turned down $1.5 million for it as well. So that's brilliant. But you know, he's got this invention, which is Point Cloud, works with a smartphone. And what it was, or what it is when you lose vision, you know, and it doesn't take an awful lot of smoke and the dilution in the air, and you actually lose vision. you can actually get from the point cloud the way out on your smartphone, which has got a very vivid green tracer that takes you, that says point this way, point that way, and this sort of thing. So, but you can actually walk quickly around a building, take the point cloud, it GPSs and all this sort of stuff, you can put all the features into there, and it automatically does it for you. You get the plans from this point of view. Now, you know, we've got to deal with these buildings very, very quickly. We've got a serious and immediate problem with, well, you've identified, I think, 12,000 plus, you know, of buildings over 18 meters. And, you know, we've got a real problem here, you know, a serious problem. So if we can use something like that.
I think there's definitely so many technologies out there. And one of the things that we've, and again, it's slightly off topic, but we've said to both the London Mayor and to Ministry of Housing is, and it might be interesting for you, Kremen, and your firm, is that there's so much innovation going on around this whole subject, but there has been no innovation competition. There's been no funding. There's been no. So we did a lot of work with the insurance industry, Lloyd's of London, facing an existential threat to their future, created the Lloyd's Lab, you know, where they bring companies in and expose them to the Lloyd's underwriting market. There is no equivalent that we've seen for anybody that's looking at technology or innovation in relation to building safety, or fire safety, for example. And I think that's a big missed opportunity. That, to David's point, we've got this huge problem here. We've got companies going out trying to raise money and put solutions together. I mean, some of them are going to be amazing, some of them are going to be useless, some of them are going to fall by the wayside. But there's nowhere to go and say, look, I've got this great idea. I need 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is, to prototype it and get some volume. But there's no way to access that other than the sort of the private markets, which I think is an oversight. I'm just going to jump in with James, because James Allen hasn't spoken yet. So James, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hello there, Matt. Actually, I just want to quickly touch on a question that Nicola Venables has actually put up onto the on the screen there, and it's something that's quite a valid point actually. About, obviously, before Grenfell happened, we knew about fire safety consultants going around and looking at buildings and putting their risk assessments in. And the point is, I think when you start looking at, with the job that I do, I'm not involved in fire risk assessing per se, but it does become part of my job, looking at glass safety risk assessing with fire glass in fire screens and so forth. But this is one big thing that I find that is very worrying now, looking at the construction industry, looking at the health and safety industry, is that very much there are, because there's nothing there to say that what competence you need to become a fire safety consultant. As soon as you pass IOSH, NEBOSH, or whatever it is with parts of certification, you can call yourself a fire safety consultant, and then again, cheapest price wins for you to get the contract to then go out and do fire safety risk assessing of high-rise blocks, whether it be a residential block, an office block, whatever. And because, and I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday talking about fire and risk assessments, and basically, are you doing a fire safety risk assessment to basically tick the box and stop yourself getting a fine? And I think this is something that really does need to be looked at properly, and with the idea of what is a competent fire safety risk consultant.
Well, just a couple of points in that. It's a great point. And reading through the consultation, there's a whole section on code of practice for fire risk assessments. And the key point there is around, from an enforcement perspective, if you can prove that you have followed the code of practice, you're unlikely to be found in breach. But similarly, if you can't prove that you followed the code of practice, so they're talking about effectively moving from advice to code of practice and what that difference makes. And I think that harks back to the point of, at the moment, that you know, the government are talking about tightening the legislation to make sure that if you're doing a fire risk assessment, you are actually competent to do it. So you can be incompetent at the moment, although you could still be breaching the fire safety order, but it's not particularly clear. I don't know whether there was some talk around with the building safety bill around licensing of fire risk assessors and levels. I don't know if, Jason, have you got any view on that? Is there anything that you can say publicly that you've heard that for higher risk buildings or high rise buildings?
Yeah, it was one of the recommendations that was put forward from the competency steering groups, which was working group 4, that there should be 3 levels of license, and depends on the complexity of the building, what that level is, so that people who wish to engage and seek a competent person can do so through that card registration scheme. But again, there needs to be a regulatory body sitting behind it to say who's competent, and actually, even before you get to that point, what is the competence criteria? So we went to great lengths to write out what that is. Now, it's all about positioning, really. So once that body of work is done, what you have is a free market, and you have all the, you know, the FPA, the FIA, the IFE, all these different institutions and bodies positioning themselves to provide training, rather than working collectively to say, what is the educational syllabus, and let's deliver this as a unit, you know.
Yeah.
But we'll see. But yeah, definitely, and that should be followed through. Now, if they have accepted all of the recommendations, that's coming. That's one of them.
Albeit some years away. The other point, just on while we're sort of directly linking to the Hackett review and resident engagement, there's something that when I was reading through the guidance today that particularly wound me up. I'll get on my hobby horse now, where some of the expert contributors in the free text said that fire risk assessments are technical and will cause anxiety to residents. They will cause undue anxiety to residents. So I put a tweet out that said that I haven't met anybody yet that was seeking counselling for anxiousness over the fire risk assessment. The anxiety to my mind normally is the fact that they can't get them and they want to know whether they're living in a dangerous building or not. So I understand the point of a summary, but to turn around and say, I will impose my view upon you as an expert that you will be anxious because of a fire risk assessment, I thought was particularly patronising and patently untrue. But unfortunately, it doesn't tell you who said that in the response. But has anyone got, I mean, I see Nikki's got her hand up there and she's wanted to come in. So have you got a thought on that, Nikki?
Kind of. It was more just going back to Jason, and you may have already talked about it because I was a few minutes late joining. But the consultation touches on how they see the different bodies interacting and the increased interaction. As somebody who's kind of outside the industry, I find the history and the hierarchy of kind of fire safety and who's involved and when and where so confusing, and I have no idea how they're gonna get all of these different bodies to work together and agree. You know, you see some posts where you might have a few different fire safety engineers and they can't agree between them on a, you know, one simple case. How do you get all of these different bodies and all of these different entities involved and agreeing to one outcome?
You're right. There needs to be a workshop, and collectively they need to work it through. And you know, like all things, even development of British standards, when you have a committee of people, they're not always going to agree. So it does come down to who's got the best argument and how you frame that argument for what is put forward. And the true test for that is how that information is interpreted by the general public when they come to use it, because sometimes what's written isn't always the intent, and then it gets amended, it gets changed. But it is hard because there is no oversight and governance by one particular professional body, and so they have to work collectively and collaborate by some means. Now, I have lots of experience with this where you can provide guidance to a professional body and they'll totally ignore it because it doesn't serve the purpose for what it is that they need to deliver. You've got to choose your battles, I guess.
Do you think it needs to be as complex as it currently is? Because it feels like there's layers upon layers of different regulations and different bodies involved. And it feels like simplification is needed of all of that.
Massively. It is terribly, terribly complicated. New Zealand did a good thing when they started to develop fire safety standards, and they took what we use as British standards and they ripped them apart and they came up with acceptable solutions. And there's several of them. And so depending on the type of building you're building, you pick up acceptable solution number one, or that's perfect for a house. You do that. And it's done in such a way it's pretty prescriptive. You can move away from prescriptive codes to an engineered solution, much like we do now with 9999. The difference is, in the UK, we want it to be risk-based. And so the government do not pick up the tab if something goes wrong. They'll provide a means of saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, it's deemed to meet the standard. And if you move away from that, you need to show us how you meet the standard. But even when something goes wrong, you're not in a position of, you're almost guilty before proven innocent, because, you know, because it's gone wrong, the government are quite right saying, well, you didn't quite do it right then, did you? Because this is what we've printed. This is how we tell you to do it. And, you know, you couldn't have done it right, obviously. And so they don't want to be liable for any fire that happens, because they, you know, that's why they don't want it to be prescriptive.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jason. Can I just jump in? We're getting a bit tight on time, so I'm going to go to Tony quickly, and then we're going to go to Steve McKenzie. Then I think we're going to go to David Jones. So yeah. Tony first.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Nicola brought out the point about a lot of people not working together. This was a big problem with the 9/11 bombings in the States. They found that none of the emergency services could talk to one another, because they were all using different radio frequencies, different communication systems. And I doubt the system is very much different here in UK. It's something that has to be addressed.
Thanks, Tony. Steve.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing I take back to the fire sector, and I will be taking this back, is, you know, 20 years on, we've got too many professional bodies, too many risk registers, too many dogs in the fight for a very lucrative market. They need to consolidate into one body, end of. The government, we do have three streams. We have approved documents, which is a prescriptive tick books. If you can comply with that recipe, you should be pretty safe. We've got BS 9999 or 9991, which takes us into more a qualitative design, semi-quantitative design, and then BS 7974, which is engineering approaches. Many of us in the fire sector already have certifications, HNDs, degrees, postgrads, a body of professional registrations, and then they keep adding on. You need to be an accredited risk assessor. You need to be a chartered engineer. You know, stop the money-making machine. Go back to reappraising everybody's credentials. Get the ones that are fraudsters that can come in with nothing out the sector, and keep the good ones, you know. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we need to do, and it needs practical application. But we have no independent charity. We have no independent ombudsman. We have no independent body. Look at them all. They all subscribe to their member views, or are attached to government, or are attached to a sector and industry. And I think one thing that the sector is skirting around is reducing that, removing that, and giving everybody a focal point for fire safety. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. David, quickly.
Yeah, very, very quick. Nicola, this just addressed the point you were making about you know, simplification, and the point you were making, Stephen. Our institute, we do something with year 8 schools, you know, and this is our contribution. These are 13-year-olds. Now, back to basics. We mentioned risk assessments, you know, and I say to designers, before you design anything, break your pencils, tear up your paper, you know, actually find the hazards, and then a risk assess them. Now, this is the board that I take into schools. That's the board that 13-year-olds play on, you know, and I tell you what, they stick their post-it notes all over that. And I can say, hold your board up. And I know red, green, and, you know, red, green, and amber post-it notes, and I can read a board whether somebody's risk averse, whether they are whatever. I've done this 5 years with the Institute of Physics. We go out as a roadshow. So back to basics, you know, there are professionals that don't even know how to do a risk assessment. They say they do, you know, they say we're competent and they've passed their members of this and members of that. But you ask somebody to do a real proper risk assessment and then actually measure it into. People don't actually realize, a lot of professionals don't even realize that a risk assessment is a measurement. It's a measurement of likelihood and probability, you know? Teach them that. At the end of the hour or so that I spend with these year 8s, they know the bleach in the house and all this sort of stuff. We go through what is a hazard and, you know, what is the likelihood, what is the probability? And that is back to basics. So that's my little point. I want to sort of.
No, thanks, David. That's really good. Just wanted to sort of say, just on Nikki's point as well, I think you make a great point, Nikki, is that if we look at the fire safety bill or the fire safety order, that's UK Home Office, so government department number 1. You've then got regulation from Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government, government department number 2 with its own Secretary of State as well. You've then got Department of Work and Pensions for the Health and Safety Executive. So we're now trying to bring all of these groups together within government and get them to be harmonious about high-rise building safety or building safety. So just imagine what must go on behind the scenes. There was a tweet I put out earlier for a screenshot from the consultation. I can't find it now, but it was one paragraph that talked about all of these different regulatory regimes and then effectively finished up with, that's a bit of a mess, isn't it? So we might need to see if we can sort it out or get them to, do you know, and it's so complex. And I put on there that COSH and Health and Safety at Work Act and all these other things weren't listed in that paragraph. That if you look at that from a building manager's perspective, navigating all of this treacle and compliance burden is really hard, when actually what we should be doing is somehow, I don't know what the solution is at the moment, saying, how do we deliver a safe building?
Yeah.
You know, how do we apply common sense? And again, you've got to encapsulate that in law, but it does seem that we're just layering more and more compliance burden on top of everybody, and we're not actually taking anything away or changing anything. We're just adding more.
Or confusion.
Yeah, and that's just cost, and it's time, and it's also the propensity, I think, for people just to tune out and ignore it and think, do you know what? Back to the other point that we talk about is, if it's not going to get enforced, what's the harm in just ignoring it anyway? Because statistically, I'm probably not going to be managing the next Grenfell. So
I think as well, the likelihood that people are going to be managing this off the side of their desk, like unless you're a large company, you're not going to have somebody assigned to fire safety. It's going to be one tiny part of their job.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nicola. Yep.
Yeah. So has anyone got anything else that I've taken pages of notes. We haven't gone through most of it, and that's fine. But is there anything that anyone else wanted to raise in terms of observations, or we've got a couple of minutes, or just thoughts on how it's all gone?
I feel like I'm just still absorbing. So I'd love to get back together again in like a week or 2 weeks' time and have another chat.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if everyone wants to do that, we could do it again.
Yeah. That's happy with me, Matt. Yeah, I'd quite like to have another chat in about a week's time. Yeah, that'd be great.
So then everyone's going to read it before then, are they?
Yeah.
Are we all going to be tested on this later on then, Matt?
Yeah, there'll be an exam in 3 weeks' time.
Get a certificate. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, Matt, just a quick suggestion. We've got a really kind of broad range of expertise here, and I like people that want to absorb it and take what we are saying as fire specialists and say, don't get it, or that's really good. I think we're getting lost in the ether of all these documents, all these consultations, all these bodies, all these departments. Let's try and get a little technical group together to simplify things and relay that to these millions of residents so that everybody can keep up. And I want to maybe suggest, Matt, how you fix for on the back of this, maybe helping with that? A little technical group?
Yeah.
Can I?
What have I just signed up to? I just want to thank everybody for coming, and please I know a lot of people apologized and said, oh, I'm not an expert when I'm on the call. I'm only this or I'm only that. I genuinely believe in everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got diversity of thought. There's no such thing as a bad idea, unless I say it is. But the key thing is that we get different viewpoints. And back to that thing is to turn around and say, look, I just don't get this. What is this all about? And I'll be the first one to say I don't get a lot of things. So I think if we book something in for a couple of weeks' time, tell your friends that they might want to come along, or hopefully we'll see everybody that we've seen here again tonight, and we'll talk about it, and we'll maybe go into some more detail about, maybe we'll get more organised and get people to put some topics for discussion forwards prior to it, and then we'll be a bit, this was just a sort of toe in the water thing, but hopefully it's been useful way to spend an hour. So thank you very much for coming, everybody.